In the harsh expanse of the American frontier, where mercy is as scarce as water, a young widow's world shatters when her husband falls in battle. Cast out by her own kin, deemed a burden too heavy to bear, she faces the unforgiving wilderness alone. With hope fading like the setting sun, fate intervenes through an unexpected guardian, a proud Sioux warrior who defies both his tribe's traditions and settler prejudices to offer her protection. Through treacherous plains and hostile territories, their journey becomes more than just survival. It transforms into a tale of two souls from different worlds, finding strength in each other despite the shadows of prejudice and violence that threaten to tear them apart, but can love truly bridge. The chasm between two worlds set on destroying each other. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The leather binding of her mother's Bible crackled as Sarah Thorne traced the familiar gilt edges in the candlelight. 6 months had passed since she'd followed Thomas west to Fort Robinson, trading Boston's cobblestone streets for the raw beauty of the Nebraska territory. Now, in the dying light of autumn, she found herself alone in their modest cabin, waiting for his return from patrol. Her fingers lingered over the family records page, where generations of births, marriages, and deaths were recorded in careful script. The newest entry, written in her own hand just half a year ago, marked her marriage to Lieutenant Thomas Thorne. The ink had barely dried when they'd set out west, her family's disapproval following them like a shadow across the prairie. The cabin's silence was broken only by the gentle crackling of the hearth fire and the distant howl of a coyote. Sarah moved to the window, pulling her shawl tighter against the evening chill. The fort's walls rose dark against the purple twilight, a supposed bulwark against the dangers that lurked in the vast grasslands beyond. But lately those walls had begun to feel more like a prison than a protection. She thought of this morning's farewell, of Thomas's brave smile as he mounted his horse. "Just a routine patrol," he'd assured her, touching the lieutenant's bars on his collar. "We'll be back before the week is out." But she'd seen the worry in his eyes, heard the whispered conversations among the officers about increased tribal activity in the region. Sarah returned to her Bible, seeking comfort in its weathered pages. The book had been her mother's wedding gift, pressed into her hands with tears and warnings about the foolishness of following a soldier to the frontier. "You'll be alone out there," her mother had said. "No family, no proper society, nothing but savages and dust." But Thomas had shown her a different truth. Here, amid the endless skies and rolling prairies, Sarah had found a freedom she'd never known in Boston. The local Sioux, who occasionally traded at the fort, were not the bloodthirsty warriors of her mother's imagination, but a proud people with their own rich traditions. She'd even begun learning a few words of their language, much to the scandalized disapproval of the other officers' wives. The sound of hoofbeats drew her to the window again. A lone rider was approaching the fort at a gallop, his form barely visible in the gathering dusk. Something about his urgency sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Setting aside her Bible, she hurried to the door, stepping out onto the small porch just as the sentry's challenge rang out. "Message for the commander," the rider shouted. "Lieutenant Thorne's patrol has been ambushed." Sarah's world tilted. The Bible slipped from her fingers, landing with a dull thud in the prairie dust. As she stood frozen on the porch, the fort erupted into activity. Shouts, running feet, the clash of weapons being gathered. But all she could hear was her mother's voice echoing across the miles. "You'll be alone out there." Around her, the last light of day bled from the sky, leaving only darkness and the weight of impending grief. They brought Thomas's saber back to her 3 days later. The blade still bore traces of rust-colored blood, despite someone's apparent attempt to clean it. Captain Morrison stood awkwardly in her doorway, his hat clutched in his hands, as the fort chaplain explained in gentle tones how her husband had died defending his men from an ambush in Wolf Creek Canyon. He fought like a true soldier, Mrs. Thorne, Morrison added, unable to meet her eyes. Gave his life so others could escape. Sarah received the saber without a word, her fingers closing around the worn leather grip that still bore the impression of Thomas's hand. She didn't cry. The tears would come later, in the dark hours when she lay alone in their bed, clutching his pillow to her chest. The following days passed in a fog of grief and formal condolences. The other officers' wives brought covered dishes she couldn't eat and whispered sympathies that rang hollow in her ears. Behind their words, she heard the calculations beginning. What to do with the young widow, barely 22, with no family in the territory and no means of support? The answer came sooner than she expected, just 1 week after the funeral. Captain Morrison's wife Margaret appeared at her door, her face set in lines of practiced concern. "The Colonel's wife and I have been discussing your situation, dear," Margaret began, settling herself uninvited in Thomas's favorite chair. "We all agree it's best if you return east to your family. The next supply wagon leaves for Omaha in 3 days. We've taken the liberty of securing you passage." Sarah's hands stilled over the saber she'd been cleaning. "I have no intention of returning east," she said quietly. "This is my home now." Margaret's smile tightened. "Don't be foolish, dear. A young woman alone on the frontier, it simply isn't done. Besides, your presence here would be awkward, a reminder of failure. Bad for morale, you understand." The true message was clear. She was no longer welcome within the fort's walls. Her status, her very identity, had died with Thomas in that canyon. That evening, as Sarah packed what few possessions she could carry, her eyes fell on the blood-stained saber mounted above the mantel. In that moment she made her decision. She would not retreat to Boston in defeat, to face her mother's pitying, "I told you so." The frontier had given her a taste of freedom, of a life beyond society's rigid constraints. If the fort would not have her, she would make her own way. Dawn found her standing at the fort's gates, a small bundle of supplies at her feet and Thomas's saber strapped to her saddle. No one came to bid her farewell. Even Margaret Morrison had declared it more dignified to make her departure before the fort awakened. As Sarah mounted her horse, the rising sun caught the edge of Thomas's saber, throwing off a flash of light, like a final salute. Ahead lay the vast expanse of the prairie, beautiful and merciless. She had no plan, no destination in mind, only a fierce determination not to let them write the end of her story. The sentry wouldn't meet her eyes as he opened. The gates. Sarah rode out without looking back, the morning wind catching at her hair. Behind her, she heard the heavy thud of the gates closing, cutting her off forever from the life she had known. The sound echoed in her ears like a death knell, or perhaps, though she didn't know it yet, like the first notes of a new beginning. The third day, Sarah's water canteen swung empty at her hip, a hollow reminder of her dwindling chances. The September sun beat down mercilessly, turning the vast prairie into a shimmering sea of golden grass. Her horse, a steady mare named Belle, plodded forward with dropping head, her own thirst evident in her labored breathing. Sarah's initial determination had given way to the harsh reality of frontier survival. The skills she'd learned as an officer's wife, how to maintain a proper household, organize social functions, manage servants, meant nothing out here. The wilderness cared nothing for social graces or Boston breeding. She touched the dry canteen again, remembering Thomas's lessons about water sources in the territory. "Follow the wildlife," he'd said during their early rides together. "Birds and deer always know where to find water." But the sky remained empty of birds, and the only wildlife she'd seen were distant antelope, too swift and wary to follow. The saber at her side caught the sunlight, its weight both comfort and burden. She'd cleaned the blood from it that morning, using precious drops of water, unable to bear the sight of Thomas's final moments carried with her. Now it served as a constant reminder of all she'd lost, and all she refused to surrender to. Midnight found her huddled beneath a lone cottonwood tree, too exhausted to continue but too anxious to sleep. The prairie nights were alive with sounds she'd never noticed from within the fort's walls. The mournful howl of wolves, the rustle of small creatures in the grass, the endless whisper of wind through the buffalo grass. Each noise made her grip the saber's hilt tighter, though she knew she had no real idea how to use it. Dawn brought no relief. Her lips were cracked, her tongue thick with thirst. Belle's steps had grown increasingly uncertain, and Sarah knew she would have to make a decision soon. To continue riding would likely kill the horse. To proceed on foot would almost certainly mean her own death. She was considering these grim options when Belle suddenly lifted her head, nostrils flaring. Before Sarah could gather the reins, the mare changed direction, moving with purpose toward a distant line of cottonwoods. Hope fluttered in Sarah's chest. Trees meant water. But as they drew closer, her hope turned to ash. The dry creek bed stretched before them, like a scar in the earth, its banks cracked and barren. Sarah slid from the saddle, her legs buckling as she hit the ground. She crawled to the creek bed, digging desperately with bare hands into the sun-baked mud, searching for any trace of moisture. Nothing. The empty canteen clattered against her hip as she sat back, a sob catching in her throat. The magnitude of her situation crashed over her. She was going to die out here, alone and unmourned, proving every doubter right about her foolish independence. Through her tears, she noticed Belle pawing at the ground near a cluster of rocks. The mare's insistence drew Sarah's attention to a patch of green grass, incongruous in the parched landscape. With trembling hands, she began clearing away loose stones, her efforts rewarded by the feel of damp soil. A seep spring. Thomas had mentioned them once, underground water sources that barely reached the surface. It wasn't much, but it was survival. Hours later, having painstakingly collected enough water to fill her canteen and refresh Belle, Sarah sat watching the sunset behind the cottonwoods. Her hands were raw from digging, her dress caked with mud, but she felt a fierce pride in her small victory over the prairie's harsh indifference. As darkness settled around her camp, Sarah caught a glimpse of movement on the ridge above the dry creek. For a brief moment, she saw the silhouette of a mounted figure against the stars. By the time she scrambled for Thomas's saber, the figure had vanished, leaving her to wonder if thirst and exhaustion had conjured the vision. But deep in her heart, Sarah knew she was no longer alone on the prairie. Black Wolf had tracked the white woman for 2 days, watching her struggle against the prairie's harsh judgment. He'd seen others like her before, settlers who ventured too far from their wooden walls, their bodies eventually claimed by sun and wind. But something about this one was different. She moved with purpose, not panic, and the soldier's weapon at her side spoke of a story he wished to understand. The morning sun found him crouched at the edge of the seep spring, reading the signs she'd left behind. Her small footprints in the mud told of determination. She had worked for hours to gather water, not giving in to despair. The medicine pouch at his belt, filled with sacred herbs and blessing stones, seemed to grow heavier as he considered his choices. His people's council had warned against involvement with the white settlers. "They bring only death and broken promises," the elders said. But as he followed her trail northward, he saw she was heading straight toward Red Rock Canyon, territory claimed by renegade Crow warriors who showed mercy to neither white nor Sioux. Sarah felt the fever taking hold as she urged Belle forward. The water from the seep spring had sustained them, but 2 nights sleeping on the cold ground had left her chilled to the bone. The saber's weight dragged at her side, and the horizon seemed to tilt and swim before her eyes. She didn't hear the approach of the other horse until its shadow fell across her path. Looking up through the haze of fever, she saw a magnificent paint stallion, and astride it a warrior whose bearing spoke of both power and grace. His face was framed by 2 long braids adorned with eagle feathers, and his eyes held neither hostility nor pity, only careful assessment. Sarah's hand moved toward Thomas's saber, but the effort sent waves of dizziness through her. "If you're going to kill me," she managed in a hoarse whisper, "please make it quick." The warrior's expression didn't change, but he dismounted with fluid grace, keeping his hands where she could see them. To her surprise, he spoke in careful, accented English. "If I wished you dead, I would have left you to find Red Rock Canyon." He reached slowly for a decorated pouch at his belt, and Sarah tensed. But instead of a weapon, he withdrew a handful of herbs and a small clay pot. With deliberate movements, he gathered dry grass for a fire, all while maintaining a respectful distance. "I am called Black Wolf," he said as he worked. "And you, white woman, have the spirit of a buffalo, strong, but sometimes too proud to turn from a dangerous path." The medicine pouch he carried bore intricate beadwork, depicting a wolf running beneath stars. Sarah noticed this through her fever haze as he steeped the herbs in hot water. The bitter tea he offered her smelled of sage and something sharper. "Unfamiliar. Why help me?" she asked, cradling the warm clay pot in trembling hands. "Your people and mine are enemies." Black Wolf's eyes traveled to the saber at her side, then back to her face. "The eagle does not hate the hawk, though they hunt the same prey. The river does not refuse to carry both wolf and deer to water." He touched the medicine pouch at his belt. "The spirits led me to your trail. I choose to believe they had reason." As the herb tea worked through her system, Sarah felt the fever's grip begin to loosen. She watched as Black Wolf tended to Belle with the same quiet competence he'd shown in caring for her. There was nothing of the savage her mother had warned about, nor the noble savage of romantic novels. Here was simply a man offering help to another human being in need. The sun was setting when Black Wolf finally spoke again. "Red Rock Canyon lies ahead. The crow who hunt there would not show you mercy." He paused, considering. "I know a safe path if you would accept guidance from a Sioux warrior." Sarah looked from the empty prairie behind to the dangerous path ahead. The medicine pouch at Black Wolf's belt caught the last rays of sunlight, its beaded wolf seeming to run with purpose beneath eternal stars. In its craftsmanship, she saw not just skill, but story, a culture as rich and complex as her own. "I would be honored," she said softly, "to learn your path." That first evening of their unlikely alliance, Black Wolf made camp in a sheltered hollow, positioning himself where he could watch both approaches through the tall grass. As he worked, his hands moved with practiced efficiency, gathering wood and arranging stones for a fire pit. Sarah found herself studying his movements, noting how each action seemed to flow naturally into the next, like water over stones. From his saddlebag, Black Wolf withdrew a small wooden figure, a horse carved with remarkable detail, its mane flowing as if caught in prairie wind. He worked on it during their meal of dried buffalo meat, his knife making delicate adjustments to the figure's legs. "You create beauty even in necessary tasks," Sarah observed, breaking their comfortable silence. Her fever had broken, leaving her clear-headed enough to feel the strangeness of their situation, a proper Boston lady sharing camp with a Sioux warrior. Black Wolf's hands stilled on the carving. "Beauty is necessary," he replied, weighing each English word carefully. "Like water, like breath. Your people build straight lines, square boxes, but the earth knows no straight lines." He offered her the wooden horse, and Sarah caught her breath. At its artistry, every muscle was defined, every detail perfect down to the individual strands of the tail. It reminded her of Belle, who grazed peacefully beside Black Wolf's paint stallion. "I had thought—" She hesitated, then pushed forward. "We were taught your people were savages, interested only in war and raiding." A smile touched Black Wolf's eyes, though his face remained serious. "And we were taught white women were weak creatures who fell over in the wind." His gaze took in her mud-stained dress, her capable handling of the camp equipment. "Perhaps we both have much to unlearn." As darkness settled around them, Black Wolf began speaking softly in his own language, pointing to stars wheeling overhead. Sarah listened to the rhythm of unknown words, catching meanings through his gestures. Stories of how the stars came to be, of great hunts carried out across the sky. "Teach me," she said suddenly, "your words, your stories. If I am to travel with you, I should understand." Black Wolf considered her request, turning the carved horse in his hands. "Knowledge is a bow that shoots both ways," he said finally. "I will teach you our words, if you will teach me to better speak yours. A warrior should know his enemy's tongue." "Are we enemies then?" Sarah asked quietly. In answer, Black Wolf held out the wooden horse. "Keep this," he said. "Let it remind you that beauty can be found between two worlds." His fingers brushed hers as she took the carving, and Sarah felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the nearby fire. They spent the evening exchanging words, simple things at first: fire, water, horse, star. Sarah found herself stumbling over the complex sounds of Lakota, while Black Wolf shaped English words with careful precision, his deep voice giving them new music. When Sarah finally lay down to sleep, the wooden horse cradled in her palm, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known since Thomas's death. The saber still lay within reach, but its weight seemed less burdensome now. Black Wolf took first watch, his profile strong against the starlit sky. In the dying firelight, Sarah saw him touch the medicine pouch at his belt, his lips moving in what might have been prayer. She wondered if his spirits were as uncertain about this alliance as her own god might be. Yet as sleep took her, Sarah smiled, remembering his words about beauty being as necessary as water. Perhaps that was true of understanding as well. As vital as the air they breathed, this bridge they were building word by word beneath the vast prairie sky. Dawn broke over unfamiliar terrain as Black Wolf led them through a narrow passage. Between towering sandstone cliffs, the morning air carried the sweet scent of wild sage, growing in abundant clusters along the rocky path. Sarah watched as Black Wolf dismounted to gather several stems, binding them together with a strip of leather from his pouch. "Medicine," he explained, handing her the bundle. "For cleansing, for new paths." The sage's silver-green leaves seemed to shimmer in the early light, its fragrance speaking of things ancient and healing. The passage suddenly widened, revealing a hidden valley that took Sarah's breath away. A clear stream tumbled down one rocky wall, feeding a small lake that mirrored the sky. Cottonwoods and willows created shaded grottos, while the surrounding cliffs offered protection from both weather and unfriendly eyes. "Few know of this place," Black Wolf said, leading their horses toward the water. "My grandfather showed me as a boy. The spirits guard it." He pointed to pictographs visible on the canyon walls, ancient red handprints and animal figures that seemed to dance in the morning light. Sarah dismounted carefully, her legs still weak from fever. The wooden horse Black Wolf had carved bounced gently against her hip, secured in her dress pocket. "It's beautiful," she breathed, taking in the peaceful sanctuary. "Like a world apart from everything else." Black Wolf nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes we must step away from our path to see where it truly leads." He began unloading essential supplies from his horse, movements efficient but unhurried. "We will rest here, regain strength, then decide." "Decide what?" Sarah asked, though something in her heart already knew, whether to walk the path the spirits have shown or return to the world of straight lines. His dark eyes met hers steadily. Some choices must be made in quiet places. They established camp near the lake, under a spreading cottonwood. Black Wolf showed Sarah how to construct a shelter using branches and his spare blanket, creating a small space that was surprisingly comfortable. The work helped keep her mind from darker thoughts, of Thomas, of the fort, of her uncertain future. As the day progressed, Black Wolf revealed more of his knowledge. He showed her which plants were edible, how to set snares for rabbits, how to read the weather in the clouds. Sarah found herself speaking of her own life in return, of Boston's crowded streets, of books and music, of the dreams that had led her west. "Your words paint pictures," Black Wolf observed, as they shared an evening meal of fresh-caught fish. Like stories on buffalo hide. He had been teaching her more Lakota words throughout the day, and she had helped him refine his English pronunciation. Sarah touched the sage bundle, now hanging from a branch of their shelter. "I never knew there could be so much life in the prairie," she admitted. "At the fort, we saw only emptiness and danger." "Many see only what they expect to see," Black Wolf replied. He added more wood to their small fire, sending sparks dancing, upward like earthbound stars. Fear blinds worse than darkness. That night, as Sarah lay in her shelter listening to the stream's gentle music, she found herself thinking about expectations. She had expected to die alone in the prairie. Instead, she had found protection, knowledge, and something else she wasn't quite ready to name. Black Wolf sat at the fire's edge, keeping watch. The sage's sweet smoke drifted between them, and Sarah remembered his words about medicine for new paths. Perhaps that's what this hidden valley was, a place of healing, yes, but also of transformation. She drew out the wooden horse, its form smooth and familiar now in her hands. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Black Wolf's profile against the firelight, strong and dignified. He had shown her nothing but respect and kindness, this man she had been taught to fear. A wolf's howl echoed from the cliffs, answered by another more distant. Black Wolf's head lifted, reading messages in the sounds that Sarah could only guess at. Yet she felt no fear now at the wild voices, only a growing sense that she was exactly where she needed to be. The sage bundle swayed gently in the night breeze, releasing its healing fragrance. Tomorrow would bring decisions, but for now, in this valley hidden from the world's judgment, Sarah allowed herself to simply be, no longer the proper Boston lady, nor the officer's widow, but something new, something as yet unnamed, like a story still being written on the evening air. The rhythm of days in the hidden valley began to heal. Something in Sarah she hadn't known was broken. Each morning she woke to find Black Wolf already returned from his dawn patrol, often with fresh game or gathered food. He moved through the world with such natural grace that watching him became a kind of meditation. On their fourth morning, Black Wolf sat cross-legged by the fire, carefully stringing tiny blue and white beads onto sinew. His fingers, so strong in battle and hunting, displayed surprising delicacy in this task. Sarah, grinding dried herbs as he taught her, found herself mesmerized by the pattern emerging beneath his hands. "In my world," she said softly, "men would consider such work beneath them." Black Wolf's fingers never paused in their steady rhythm. "Your men have strange ideas of what makes them men." His English grew more fluid daily, though he kept his formal manner of speech. "Beauty brings honor to all who create it." Sarah watched the beads catch morning light, thinking of the carved horse she now wore on a leather thong around her neck. "Will you teach me?" His dark eyes met hers, serious but warm. "This is women's work among my people, but perhaps—" He smiled slightly. "Since you are learning our ways, it is appropriate." He showed her how to thread the fine sinew, how to choose beads that sang together in harmony. As she worked beside him, their shoulders occasionally brushing, Sarah felt a peace she hadn't known since childhood. The beads became a language of their own, white for clouds, blue for sky, amber for the prairie's endless waves. "Each pattern tells a story," Black Wolf explained, showing her the bracelet taking shape. In his hands, this one speaks of paths crossing under strange stars. His fingers traced the intricate design. "See here, 2 rivers meeting, becoming one stronger river." Sarah's heart quickened at his words, at the gentle brush of his fingers near her wrist as he demonstrated a technique. She found herself hyper-aware of his presence, the subtle scent of sage and prairie wind that seemed to surround him. Later that day, he taught her to shoot with a bow, not his sacred hunting bow, but a smaller one he'd crafted for teaching. "The saber is a good weapon," he said, adjusting her stance with careful hands, "but it requires too much closeness to danger. The bow gives you distance." Sarah felt the burn in her shoulders as she drew the bowstring again and again. Each time she loosed an arrow, Black Wolf would comment in Lakota, teaching her new words along with the skill. By sunset, she had managed to hit the target twice, and the pride in his nod meant more than any society compliment she'd ever received. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Black Wolf presented her with the finished bracelet. The beaded pattern caught the firelight, making the design seem to move like living water. For protection, he said simply, securing it around her wrist with practiced fingers. Sarah touched the beads wonderingly. "It's beautiful, but I don't deserve." "Worth is not earned only by years or tradition," he interrupted gently. "It grows like prairie grass, from seeds of respect and understanding." His hand lingered near hers for a moment longer than necessary. "You learn our ways with an open heart. That deserves recognition." They sat in comfortable silence as night drew its star-scattered blanket over the valley. Sarah found herself studying his profile, the strong lines of his face softened by firelight. She thought of how the fort women would be scandalized by her current situation. Unchaperoned, dressed in a combination of her own clothes and borrowed buckskins, learning savage ways, yet she had never felt more truly herself than in these days of quiet learning. The beaded bracelet caught the firelight as she reached to add wood to the flames, and Black Wolf's hand moved to steady her when she leaned too close. The simple touch sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire. "Tell me a story," she said impulsively in halting Lakota, using phrases he'd taught her. "About your people, your life." The smile that touched his eyes made them gleam like dark stars. He began speaking in his own language, his deep voice painting pictures of buffalo hunts and sacred ceremonies, of vision quests and great victories. Though she understood only parts, the rhythm of his words carried her like a current through the growing night. Later, as she drifted toward sleep in her shelter, Sarah realized she no longer reached for Thomas's saber before closing her eyes. Instead, her fingers found the smooth beads at her wrist, reading their story like a prayer in the darkness. Whatever path lay ahead, she was no longer walking it alone. Black Wolf found the broken arrow at dawn, its shaft splintered and its fletching torn. But the break was fresh, deliberate. He crouched by the valley's hidden entrance, reading signs that most would miss. Disturbed gravel, a partial bootprint, the subtle shifting of morning dew. Someone had scouted their sanctuary in the night. He returned to camp holding the arrow pieces, finding Sarah practicing her bow work in the early light. She'd grown stronger daily, her arrows now regularly finding their mark. The beaded bracelet caught the sun as she drew back the bowstring, and something in his chest tightened at the sight of her, this woman who moved between worlds with such grace. She lowered the bow at his approach, reading his expression. "What is it?" "Riders," he said simply, showing her the broken arrow. "White men, a patrol, maybe 5 horses." He didn't add that they'd circled the valley's entrance 3 times, searching for a way in. They passed in the night. Sarah's hand went unconsciously to Thomas's saber, which now hung properly at her hip in a refitted sheath. "From the fort?" "No." Black Wolf's voice was grim. "These are different. Horse thieves, maybe. Or deserters." He'd seen their kind before. Men who'd abandoned soldiers' honor for bandits' greed. Bad men who think the prairie holds no law. Sarah's face tightened at his words. They both knew what such men would make of finding a white woman living alone with a Sioux warrior. The peaceful days of learning and quiet companionship suddenly felt fragile as morning mist. "We should leave," she said, surprising him with her directness. "Find somewhere safer." Black Wolf studied her face, seeing not fear, but determination. The woman who'd nearly died of fever in the prairie was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more certain. The transformation stirred something, deep in his warrior's heart. "Yes," he agreed, "but first we prepare." He gestured to her bow. "Today you learn to shoot from horseback. They spent the morning in intensive training. Black Wolf taught her to grip with her knees, to move as one with her horse, to loose arrows at full gallop. Sarah fell numerous times, but always remounted without complaint. The beaded bracelet bounced against her wrist with each shot, like a heartbeat keeping time. "Good," he said as she finally managed to hit the target while riding. "You learn fast for a white woman." Sarah smiled, sweat-streaked and dusty. "And you're surprisingly patient for a savage warrior." The joke, unthinkable weeks ago, drew a low chuckle from him. But the broken arrow lay heavy in his medicine pouch, a reminder that their time of peace was ending. That evening, as they packed essential supplies and erased signs of their camp, Sarah paused in her work. "I've been thinking," she said carefully, "about what happens next. About your people." Black Wolf straightened from securing his horse's tack. "You worry they will not accept you, won't they? A white woman, widow of a cavalry officer?" She touched the beaded bracelet. "I know nothing of your customs, your proper ways." He moved closer, drawn by the uncertainty in her voice. "My people are not like yours," he said softly. "They judge by the heart's actions, not the skin's color." His fingers brushed her wrist, just above the bracelet. "You have learned our ways. With respect. That matters more than birth." Sarah's breath caught at his touch, but her eyes remained troubled. "And what of your standing among them? Surely bringing home a white woman." "I am Black Wolf," he interrupted with quiet pride. "My courage is proven, my honor known. If I choose to bring home a woman who shoots like a warrior and speaks with spirit's wisdom, who will dare question?" The confidence in his voice warmed her, but before she could respond, a distant sound froze them both. Horses' hooves on stone. Approaching the valley's hidden entrance, Black Wolf moved silently to the cliff's edge, Sarah close behind. In the gathering dusk, they could make out 5 riders making camp near the canyon mouth. Their weapons and manner confirmed his fears. Deserters turned bandits, the worst kind of predator on the frontier. "They're blocking the main path," Sarah whispered, her hand steady on her saber's hilt. Black Wolf nodded, his mind already mapping alternatives. "There is another way, harder, through the high rocks, but we must wait for deepest night." They retreated to their half-dismantled camp, everything now ready for swift departure. The broken arrow lay between them as they shared a cold meal, its splintered shaft a reminder of how quickly peace could shatter. In the darkness, Sarah's hand found his, warm and certain. No words were needed. They would face whatever came together, 2 rivers joined into one stronger flow. But for now, they waited, watching the enemy's campfire below like a fallen star, harbinger of the storm to come. They slipped from the valley like shadows, leading their horses through treacherous high passes until the bandits' campfire was lost in darkness. The night sky spread above them like a vast star quilt, the kind Black Wolf had described seeing in his grandmother's lodge. Intricate patterns of light against endless darkness, each star a point of guidance for those wise enough to read their meanings. "We follow Hunter's star," Black Wolf murmured, indicating a bright point low in the northern sky. "She will guide us to my people's summer camps." His voice carried quiet certainty, though they both knew the journey would test every skill they'd developed. The high trail demanded constant vigilance. Loose rocks could betray their passage, and the autumn nights carried bone-deep chill. During one particularly narrow passage, Sarah's horse Belle nearly lost her footing. Only Black Wolf's swift reaction, grabbing the reins, prevented disaster. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, her heart pounding. His hand found hers in the darkness, warm and steadying. "You would have done the same," he replied simply. The touch lingered, neither willing to break contact first. They made camp before dawn in a hollow, sheltered by towering rocks. Black Wolf pulled from his pack a carefully folded quilt, its pattern echoing the stars above. Blues and whites and deep purples, geometric shapes flowing into each other like dance steps. "My sister's work," he explained, wrapping it around. Sarah's shoulders. She sees patterns in stars, in dreams. Each design tells a story. His fingers traced one of the star patterns, coming to rest near Sarah's collarbone. This one speaks of journeys, of hearts finding their true path. Sarah drew the quilt closer, inhaling its scent of sweet grass and wood smoke. Will she welcome a white woman who wears her brother's beads? The bracelet caught starlight as she spoke, its pattern now as familiar to her fingers as prayer beads. Black Wolf's hand moved from the quilt to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as summer rain. She will welcome one who has earned them. His dark eyes held hers, reflecting starlight. As I welcome you into my heart. The moment stretched between them, fragile as morning frost. Sarah felt the weight of worlds shifting, Boston parlors and frontier forts falling away like autumn leaves. Here, wrapped in starlight and story, she found truth. I lost everything, she whispered, only to find what I never knew I sought. Her free hand rose to touch his face, tracing the proud line of his cheek. Their first kiss tasted of sage and wilderness, of endings and beginnings, twined together like the patterns in the star quilt. Black Wolf's arms drew her close, and Sarah felt the last walls around her heart crumble like the fort's distant boundaries. Later, as they shared warmth beneath the quilt, Black Wolf spoke softly in Lakota, teaching her new words. Words for love and belonging, for the space between heartbeats, where two souls recognize each other. Sarah repeated them carefully, each syllable a promise. Dawn found them moving north again, the star quilt carefully packed away, but its warmth lingered, like the memory of that first kiss. They rode closer now, their horses' gaits matched, hands occasionally brushing as they navigated difficult terrain. The day brought its own challenges. Twice they spotted dust on the horizon, riders searching, though whether bandits or fort patrols they couldn't be sure. Each time Black Wolf led them to clever hiding places, a dry wash deep enough to conceal horses, a stand of cottonwoods thick with autumn gold. During one such pause, waiting for riders to pass, Sarah studied Black Wolf's profile against the sky. He looked like a figure from legend, proud and certain, yet his hands were gentle when they helped her dismount, when they shared water from a single canteen. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her gaze. "That my mother would say I've gone native," Sarah replied with a small smile, "and that I've never felt more truly myself." Black Wolf's answering smile held the warmth of summer plains. The heart knows its own path, even when others cannot see it. He touched the beaded bracelet at her wrist, like water finding its way through stone. That evening, as they made camp in a sheltered grove, storm clouds gathered in the north. Black Wolf read weather signs in the changing wind, in the way prairie birds flew low and urgent. "Bad medicine coming," he said, his expression grave. They worked together to create a weatherproof shelter, using techniques he'd taught her in the valley. The star quilt came out again, its patterns now a familiar comfort. As thunder rolled across the prairie, Sarah found herself tracing the star designs, remembering his words about journeys and true paths. Black Wolf caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "Whatever storms come," he said softly in Lakota, "we will face them as one," Sarah replied in the same tongue, the words flowing more naturally now. Two rivers joined, cannot be turned aside. The thunder grew closer, but in their shelter, wrapped in starlight-made fabric, they had found harbor from more than just the storm. The Lakota summer camp appeared like a vision through the morning mist. Dozens of teepees rising from the valley floor, their smoke holes releasing thin spirals that merged with the low clouds. Sarah felt Black Wolf tense beside her, his warrior's instincts reading signs she couldn't yet see. "Something has changed," he said quietly. "The camp is larger than expected. Many bands have gathered." As they drew closer, Sarah understood his concern. Hundreds of horses grazed the valley's edges, and she could make out warriors standing guard on the ridgelines. This was no ordinary summer camp. This was a gathering of nations. At the camp's edge, a magnificent teepee stood apart from the others, its buffalo hide walls painted with sacred symbols in red and black. But what caught Sarah's eye was the central image, a white buffalo, its form seeming to emerge from storm. Clouds, stars scattered across its flanks. Black Wolf drew in a sharp breath. "The white buffalo hide," he murmured, "the sacred tent of the medicine chief. He has called a great council." Before Sarah could respond, riders approached. 4 warriors, their faces painted for ceremony rather than war. The leader, a tall man with 2 eagle feathers in his hair, raised his hand in greeting. "Brother," he called to Black Wolf in Lakota, his eyes moving to Sarah with careful neutrality. "You return in interesting times, bringing interesting company." "Swift." "Hawk," Black Wolf acknowledged, switching to English for Sarah's benefit. "My sister's husband and a respected voice in council." His hand moved subtly closer to his weapon, though his voice remained calm. "We seek welcome according to the old ways." Swift Hawk dismounted, approaching their horses with deliberate steps. Sarah fought the urge to touch Thomas's saber or the bow at her back. Instead, she straightened in her saddle, meeting his scrutiny with quiet dignity. A white woman who rides like Lakota, carries a warrior's weapons and wears a medicine man's. "Beadwork," Swift Hawk observed. His English was as fluent as Black Wolf's, though he spoke it with a different accent. "The council will have much to discuss." "She is under my protection," Black Wolf said quietly, but with steel in his voice. Swift Hawk's expression softened slightly. "Peace, brother. These are days of signs and wonders. Come, the medicine chief will want to speak with you both." They were led through the camp, drawing stares and whispers. Children peeked from behind teepee flaps, women paused in their work to watch, and warriors studied them with unreadable expressions. Sarah heard fragments of Lakota that she understood. White woman, Black Wolf's return, and something about omens. At the entrance to the white buffalo teepee, an elderly woman waited, her face deeply lined but her eyes sharp as hawks. She wore a dress adorned with elk teeth and porcupine quills, and around her shoulders draped a strip of pure white buffalo hide. "Grandmother," Black Wolf said respectfully, dismounting and helping Sarah from her horse. "We seek wisdom." The old woman's eyes fixed on Sarah's beaded bracelet, then moved to the star quilt visible in their packs. Finally, she reached out and took Sarah's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "I have dreamed of you," she said in perfect English, her voice like wind through prairie grass. The white woman who would come from the east, carrying a warrior's heart beneath settler's skin. She touched the white buffalo hide at her shoulders. Like this hide, different on the outside but sacred at its core. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected acceptance in the old woman's voice. "I don't understand," she managed to say. "Understanding comes like dawn," the grandmother replied. "Slowly, then all at once." She turned to Black Wolf. "You have chosen well, grandson. The spirits speak through your heart." But before they could respond, a commotion rose from the camp's edge. Swift Hawk returned at a gallop, his face grave. "Riders approaching from the south," he reported. "Many riders with guns. They follow your trail, brother." The grandmother's grip tightened on Sarah's hand. "The storm gathers," she said softly. "Now we shall see if the white buffalo's blessing is strong enough to turn it aside." Black Wolf moved closer to Sarah, his shoulder touching hers. In that moment, surrounded by curious faces and approaching danger, Sarah felt the weight of worlds colliding, yet the grandmother's words echoed in her mind, and the white buffalo seemed to watch from the tippy walls with knowing eyes. Perhaps, like that sacred hide, she too had been marked for a purpose larger than herself. Swift Hawk spread the wrinkled paper on the council lodge floor, its bold letters stark against the weathered parchment. Sarah's own face stared back at her, rendered in crude woodcut lines, yet recognizable enough to send a chill down her spine. The words beneath made her blood run cold. Wanted, Sarah Thorne, for theft of military property and suspected conspiracy with hostile Indians. Reward, $100 in gold return to Fort Robinson to be detained for questioning regarding the death of Lieutenant Thomas Thorne. They twist truth like a snake in the grass, Black Wolf said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Your husband's saber was yours, by right of marriage and death. The medicine chief, a tall man with eyes like dark stones in water, studied the poster thoughtfully. The white man's law is not our concern, he said in Lakota, which Sarah now understood well enough to follow. But their guns and numbers are. Through the lodge's smoke hole, Sarah could hear the camp preparing for possible battle, women gathering children, warriors checking weapons, horses being moved to protected valleys. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her like winter. Snow, I should leave, she said quietly. I bring danger to your people. No. Black Wolf's response was immediate, his hand finding hers. We face this together. The grandmother who had welcomed them sat wrapped in her white buffalo robe, smoking a sacred pipe. The spirits did not guide you here for you to run away, she said, passing the pipe to Sarah. They have shown me a different path. Sarah accepted the pipe with proper ceremony, as Black Wolf had taught her. The tobacco's sweet smoke carried memories of their time in the hidden valley, of lessons learned and trust earned. When she passed the pipe to Black Wolf, their fingers brushed, and she felt the familiar surge of strength that came from his presence. Swift Hawk had been conferring with other warriors at the lodge's entrance. Now he returned, his face grave. The riders approached from two directions, soldiers from the south and those bandits we heard of from the east. They worked together now, drawn by greed and false justice. The medicine chief rose, his ceremonial robes catching the lodge's firelight. So be it. The spirits have given us a sign in the white buffalo hide, and now they send us a test. He turned to Sarah, switching to English. You wear our beads, speak our tongue, and carry a warrior's heart. Will you stand with us? Sarah touched the beaded bracelet at her wrist, thinking of all that had changed since she'd left the fort. She was no longer the proper Boston lady, nor even the officer's grieving widow. Here, among people she'd been taught to fear, she had found her true self. I will stand, she said firmly, but I won't see blood shed in my name. There must be another way. Black Wolf's sister, a young woman named Dawn Singer, spoke up from her place by the fire. Perhaps there is. The wanted poster speaks of questioning, not execution. If we could prove Lieutenant Thorne's death was no conspiracy, the patrol survivors, Black Wolf said suddenly. They saw the ambush. They know the truth. The grandmother nodded slowly, smoke curling around her lined face. Truth has power even in times of war, but reaching it may cost dearly. Outside, a drum began to beat, the rhythm of preparation, of coming storm. Sarah felt the lodge's occupants shift, warriors and elders alike moving with the pulse of decision. I have seen this moment, the grandmother said softly, touching the white buffalo hide at her shoulders. A white woman standing between two worlds, holding peace in one hand and war in the other. The choice must be yours, daughter. Sarah looked at the wanted poster, at the crude drawing that no longer reflected who she had become. Then she looked at Black Wolf, at the love and trust in his dark eyes, at the people who had accepted her despite generations of fear and hatred. We ride to Fort Robinson, she said firmly, not in surrender, but in strength. The truth is our strongest weapon. The medicine chief lifted his hands in blessing. So be it, but you do not ride alone. The white buffalo's blessing goes with you, and the strength of our people. As the council dispersed to prepare, Black Wolf drew Sarah aside. Are you certain? He asked softly. The fort holds many dangers. Sarah touched his cheek, no longer shy about showing affection. I'm certain of us, she replied. The rest will follow as it must. The wanted poster lay forgotten by the fire, its edges curling in the heat. Outside, the drums continued their rhythm, counting down the moments until dawn would force their hand. Dawn painted the sky in shades of blood and gold as the small party departed the Lakota camp. Black Wolf rode point, with Sarah close behind. Swift Hawk and 4 of his most trusted warriors followed, while Dawn Singer accompanied them as both interpreter and witness. Before they left, the grandmother had pressed an eagle feather into Sarah's hands from the sacred bundle, she'd explained, securing it to Sarah's borrowed buckskin dress. The eagle sees truth from the highest place. It will guide your words when the time comes. They rode hard through the morning, taking paths only the Lakota knew, dry creek beds, hidden passes, trails that seemed to vanish into solid rock, only to emerge on the other side of ridges. Sarah's training with Black Wolf proved its worth as she kept pace, reading trail signs and moving as one with her horse. Near midday, they heard the first gunshot, distant but clear in the prairie air. Swift Hawk raised his hand, and the party halted in a sheltered draw. "Bandits," Black Wolf said grimly, studying tracks in the dust. "They split up to circle behind us. They mean to drive us toward the fort patrol." Sarah touched the eagle feather at her shoulder, its presence somehow steadying. "Then we change the game," she said, an idea forming. "They expect us to run like prey. What if instead we become the hunters?" A slow smile spread across Black Wolf's face, the expression she'd come to recognize as his warrior spirit rising. "You think like Lakota now," he said proudly. They divided their forces. Swift Hawk and 2 warriors would continue toward Fort Robinson, making an obvious trail. Meanwhile, Black Wolf, Sarah, Dawn Singer, and the remaining warriors would circle back to confront the bandits directly. As they separated, Dawn Singer drew her horse alongside Sarah's. "My brother chose well," she said quietly. "You have the heart of a shield woman, one who stands between her people and danger." They found the bandits' camp in a hollow near an ancient buffalo jump. 5 men, 3 of whom Sarah recognized, as army deserters, were planning their next move around a small fire. Their horses were hobbled nearby, and their guard was clearly down. Black Wolf's hand brushed Sarah's arm, drawing her attention to movement on the opposite ridge. Swift Hawk had doubled back with his warriors, completing the encirclement. The trap was set. Sarah nocked an arrow to her bow, remembering Black Wolf's lessons. "Breathe with the wind, feel the earth's pulse, let your heart be still as pond water." The first arrow, from Black Wolf's bow, took the bandits' leader completely, by surprise pinning his coat sleeve to a log. Before the others could react, a volley of arrows rained from all directions, followed by war cries that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The bandits' resistance crumbled in moments, surrounded by warriors who seemed to materialize from the very rocks. They quickly surrendered. Sarah rode forward, the eagle feather catching the wind at her shoulder. "You'll hang for this," one of the deserters spat, "consorting with savages, betraying your own kind." "My own kind?" Sarah's voice carried across the hollow, clear and strong. "My kind are those who stand for truth, who protect the innocent, who honor their words." She touched the beaded bracelet at her wrist. "I've found more civilization among these savages than in all the fort's fine manners." As their prisoners were being secured, a new sound carried on the wind, cavalry bugles approaching fast. Black Wolf moved his horse closer to Sarah's, his shoulder touching hers. "Now comes the harder battle," he said softly. Sarah reached for his hand, twining their fingers together. "No battle is too hard when fought together." Dawn Singer watched them with knowing eyes. "The eagle feather trembles," she observed. "The spirits prepare to speak through you." Looking toward the approaching dust cloud that marked the cavalry's advance, Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her. The eagle feather brushed her cheek like a blessing, and Black Wolf's hand remained strong in hers. Whatever came next, she was finally truly home. "Let them come," she said, straightening in her saddle. "Truth, like an arrow in flight, finds its mark true." The first snow fell early that year, blanketing the Lakota winter camp in hushed white. Sarah stood at the entrance of Black Wolf's family lodge, watching Dawn Singer put the final touches on what had become her wedding dress, a unique fusion of 2 worlds. The base was traditional buckskin, butter soft, and adorned with intricate beadwork, But Dawn Singer had cleverly incorporated pieces of Sarah's white silk wedding dress from her marriage to Thomas, creating something entirely new. The beads tell. "Your story," Dawn Singer explained, working by the lodge's fire. "See here the crossing of paths, the hidden valley, the eagle's blessing. And here," she touched a pattern of white beads, "the new path forward." Sarah ran her fingers over the garment, marveling at how it represented everything her life had become. The grandmother had said it was fitting, a dress that, like its wearer, bridged two worlds without betraying either. The events at Fort Robinson 2 months ago still seemed dreamlike. They had arrived with their captured bandits to find the patrol led by Captain Morrison himself. The deserter's confession, combined with testimony from survivors of Thomas's last patrol, had cleared Sarah of any wrongdoing. More importantly, the dignity and honor shown by Black Wolf's people had opened a door for dialogue. "You've changed more than your own fate," the grandmother had said afterward, watching the soldiers ride away under a fragile new truce. "You've shown them that understanding between peoples is possible." Now, as winter settled around them, that understanding was being tested in a different way. Black Wolf's people had welcomed her, but marriage between their kinds was rare and heavy with meaning. It would bind not just two hearts, but two peoples. "Are you certain?" Black Wolf had asked her one night as they sat wrapped in the star quilt, watching the northern lights dance. "The life of a Lakota woman is not easy." Sarah had touched the beaded bracelet that had started their journey. "I've never been more certain of anything," she'd replied. "My heart found its true home the moment you offered me protection." The lodge flap opened, bringing a swirl of snowflakes, and the grandmother, her white buffalo robe now lined with fur. Over winter, she carried a small bundle wrapped in tanned hide. "It is time," she announced, her eyes twinkling. "The men have finished their preparations, and the snow is a good sign. New beginnings written in white." She unwrapped her bundle, revealing something that made Sarah catch her breath, a wedding necklace of stunning complexity. Trade beads were woven with dentalium shells and carved elk ivory. But at its center hung a singular treasure, a perfect crystal that caught the firelight like captured stars. "Black Wolf's grandfather gave this to his grandmother," the old woman explained, lifting it carefully. "It has passed through our family since the time when our people first rode horses. Now it passes to you, marking you as one of us." As Dawn Singer helped her into the wedding dress, Sarah felt the weight of history settling around her shoulders. She thought of her mother in Boston, of the society women at Fort Robinson, of all who would never understand the path she had chosen. But then she touched the crystal at her throat and remembered Black Wolf's words about beauty being necessary as breath. The ceremony itself would blend traditions, like her dress. They would speak vows in both English and Lakota, share food and prayers from both cultures, and receive blessings from both the grandmother's sacred pipe and Sarah's family Bible, now decorated with a beaded cover Dawn Singer had crafted. "You look like a story come to life," Dawn Singer said softly, adjusting the dress's fall, "the kind our children will tell their children." Outside, drums began a gentle rhythm, not the fierce beat of war, but the pulse of celebration. Sarah heard Black Wolf's deep voice joining the singers, and her heart swelled with certainty. The grandmother draped the star quilt around Sarah's shoulders, protection against the winter chill. "Come," she said, her voice warm with approval. "Your warrior waits, and the spirits gather to witness." As they stepped into the swirling snow, Sarah caught a glimpse of Black Wolf standing proud in his ceremonial dress, eagle feathers in his hair, his face filled with love and wonder at the sight of her. Around them, two peoples gathered, Lakota in their winter finest, and a small delegation from the fort who had braved the weather to show support for this unprecedented union. The gi dress moved with her like a second skin, its blended elements reflecting the firelight and starlight alike. Sarah walked forward into her new life, carrying the hopes of two worlds in the folds of her wedding dress and love's certainty in her heart. Spring came to the prairie like a shy maiden, tentative at first, then blooming with sudden passion. Sarah stood with Black Wolf on a hilltop overlooking the meeting ground, where two camps faced each other across a shallow creek, Fort Robinson's delegation to the west, the Lakota Council to the east. Between them stood a single lodge, its sides painted with symbols of peace from both cultures. In her hands, Sarah held the sacred pipe, its carved bowl showing twin eagles circling each other against a star-filled sky. The grandmother had entrusted it to her that morning with words that still echoed in her mind. "You who walk between worlds must help build the bridge that others will cross." "They're coming," Black Wolf said softly, touching the beaded bracelet he still wore matched to hers. Below, they watched Captain Morrison's party approach from the fort's camp, while Swifthawk led the Lakota delegation. Both groups moved with formal dignity, weapons peace-bound with ribbons. Sarah felt the weight of the moment settle around her shoulders like the star quilt she now wore as a symbol of her position. In the months since their wedding, she had become more than just Black Wolf's wife. She had become a voice for understanding between two peoples who had known only conflict. "Remember," Black Wolf murmured as they descended to the meeting ground, "even the strongest river begins as scattered raindrops." The Peace Lodge had been prepared according to both traditions. The fort's American flag stood beside the Lakota war banner, while Sarah's family Bible lay next to the grandmother's medicine bundle. The morning sun caught the crystal at Sarah's throat, her wedding gift now serving as a symbol of her role as mediator. Captain Morrison entered first, his face showing surprise at the lodge's careful blending of cultures. "Mrs. He caught himself, inclining his head respectfully. "Lady Black Wolf, you honor us with your presence." Sarah acknowledged him with a gentle smile, noting how he struggled to reconcile the Boston lady he'd known with the woman who stood before him, dressed in beautifully beaded buckskins, yet carrying herself with all her learned grace. Swifthawk entered with the Lakota Council, including the grandmother whose white buffalo robe seemed to glow in the lodge's filtered light. The space grew thick with tension as ancient enemies faced each other, hands never far from weapons despite their peace bonds. Sarah lifted the sacred pipe, her voice clear in both languages. "We gather under one sky, drink from one river, walk on one earth. Let us share one smoke and with it share truth." She packed the pipe with careful precision, using the traditional tobacco mixture the grandmother had prepared. As she worked, she spoke of her journey, from Boston society to frontier fort, from widow to outcast, from lost soul to found heart. She spoke of discovering that courage and honor knew no color, that wisdom wore many faces, that love could bridge the widest chasms. "I have seen the best and worst of both peoples," she said, lighting the pipe with a brand from the central fire. "I have known prejudice and acceptance, hatred and love, war and peace. I stand before you as living proof that understanding is possible." The pipe passed first to Captain Morrison, who hesitated only briefly before accepting it. His hands were steady as he drew smoke and passed it to Swifthawk. Around the circle it went, each person bound by ancient custom to speak truth while holding it. Morrison spoke of changing perspectives, of learning respect for a people he'd been taught to fear. Swifthawk spoke of the need for cooperation in the face of increasing white settlement. The grandmother spoke of visions showing two peoples walking the same path while singing different songs. When the pipe returned to Sarah, she stood, drawing Black Wolf up beside her. "Look at us," she said softly, "a warrior and a lady, Lakota and white, two streams joining to form something new and strong. What we have found together is possible for all our peoples, if we have the courage to seek it." She touched the crystal at her throat, remembering the grandmother's words about bridges. "The fort needs the Lakota's knowledge of this land to survive." The Lakota need the fort's cooperation to preserve their way of life. Either we find a way forward together, or we destroy each other. Black Wolf's hand found hers as she spoke, their matched bracelets gleaming. Captain Morrison studied them thoughtfully, then looked at Swift Hawk. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "it's time for new approaches. Treaties written in understanding rather than fear." "Words are wind," Swift Hawk replied, "but actions like this meeting have weight." He gestured to Sarah and Black Wolf. "They have shown us a path. Do we have the wisdom to follow it?" The grandmother rose, her white buffalo robe seeming to gather all the lodge's light. "The spirits did not bring these two together by chance. Their union is a sign, a pattern for us to follow." She took the pipe from Sarah's hands, holding it high. "Let their bridge become our bridge." As the sun reached its peak, two peoples who had been enemies sat sharing food and cautious conversation. Sarah watched from Black Wolf's side as soldiers awkwardly tried Lakota words, while warriors practiced English phrases. Small steps like first raindrops, but perhaps enough to begin filling the river of change. The peace pipe stood in a place of honor, its twin eagles still circling endlessly beneath carved stars, watching over the first fragile seeds of understanding. As summer ripened toward autumn, Sarah sat in the shade of her and Black Wolf's lodge, watching Dawn Singer put the finishing touches on a cradle unlike any the tribe had seen before. The basic form was traditional Lakota, a sturdy wooden frame wrapped in supple hide, but Dawn Singer had incorporated elements from Sarah's world, intricate carving reminiscent of Boston furniture, and even a small pocket sewn inside for a tiny Bible alongside the medicine pouch. "A child of two worlds should sleep in a cradle of two worlds," Dawn Singer said, carefully stitching a pattern of beads that told the story of its parents' union. Sarah touched her swelling belly, feeling the flutter of new life beneath her fingers. The changes their marriage had sparked continued to spread like ripples in still water. Now, twice each month, the fort and tribe held trading days where both peoples met freely. Sarah had started a school where Lakota children learned English, while soldiers' children learned Lakota games and stories. Black Wolf taught tracking and survival skills to cavalry scouts, while their warriors learned military drilling techniques. "Who would have thought," a familiar voice said, making Sarah look up to see Captain Morrison's wife, Margaret, approaching, her arms full of fabric, "that I'd one day be asking a Lakota craftsman to repair my wagon wheel." She settled beside Sarah, watching Dawn Singer work, or that I'd be bringing calico to trade for beadwork. The transformation in Margaret was perhaps the most surprising of all. The woman who had once ordered Sarah to return east now regularly visited the Lakota camp, learning their crafts and sharing her own skills. Today, she had brought pieces of fine cloth to trade, including a length of soft white cotton she insisted would make perfect swaddling blankets. "The world changes like seasons," Sarah replied, using one of the grandmother's favorite sayings. "We either change with it or get left behind in winter." Black Wolf emerged from their lodge, his face brightening at the sight of the cradle. He carried a small object wrapped in soft hide, another surprise for the baby's cradle. Unwrapping it carefully, he revealed a carved wooden horse, much like the one he'd given Sarah during their first days together. But this one showed two horses running side by side. "For our child," he said softly, placing it in the cradle's special niche, "to remember that strength comes from running together, not apart." Dawn Singer incorporated the carving into her design, surrounding it with beadwork showing stars and eagles. Margaret leaned forward, fascinated by the blending of styles. "I'm making something too," she admitted, pulling out a half-finished quilt. "I thought, well, I'm combining star patterns from back east with Lakota designs Dawn Singer taught me." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at this simple evidence of change. The baby moved again, as if responding to the gathered women's excitement. Black Wolf's hand found her shoulder, squeezing gently. "Our child will have many mothers," he said, his voice Warm with approval. Many teachers, many paths to walk. More visitors arrived as the afternoon deepened. Swifthawk's wife bringing dried berries, the grandmother with her wisdom and medicines, even the fort doctor's wife seeking advice about using native herbs. The cradle became a gathering point, each person adding something to welcome the coming child. This is how peace grows, the grandmother observed, watching the mixed group of women share stories and skills. Not through grand treaties, but through small sharings, through children born to new ways of seeing. Sarah thought of her mother in Boston, who had finally written back after months of silence. The letter had been stiff with shock at first, but had softened when speaking of the grandchild to come. Perhaps, her mother had written, I might visit when the weather permits, to see this new life you've built. The cradle stood as testament to that new life, neither fully white nor fully Lakota, but something fresh and strong and beautiful. Dawn Singer had woven all the elements together with such skill that one could not tell where one tradition ended and another began. Like the child it will hold, Black Wolf said that evening, as they sat together watching the sunset. Our little one will carry the strength of both peoples, the wisdom of both paths. Sarah leaned against him, their matched bracelets catching the fading light, and perhaps show others that those paths need not be separate. The cradle would stand ready, waiting to rock the next generation toward a future where understanding grew as naturally as prairie grass after rain. In the fading light of autumn, Sarah sat at her writing desk, a wedding gift from the fort's carpenter who had incorporated traditional Lakota designs into its carved surfaces. Before her lay a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with two kinds of storytelling, her careful English script intertwined with Black Wolf's precise pictographs, recording their journey for future generations. My grandmother, Black Wolf, had said when presenting her with the blank journal, says that stories are like seeds. Plant them well, and they grow into forests of understanding. Their son, Thomas Swift Wolf, now 6 months old, slept peacefully in his mixed-culture cradle. Nearby, his face held features of both parents, and already he responded to both English lullabies and Lakota songs. Sarah dipped her pen, continuing their record. Today marked the first harvest celebration combining both people's traditions. The fort's grounds hosted games where Lakota youth and settler children competed together in contests of skill. Soldiers and warriors who once eyed each other with suspicion now shared techniques for hunting and horsemanship. The women of both communities exhibited their crafts, beadwork alongside quilting, traditional medicines beside European remedies. Most remarkable was the feast itself. Tables groaned under the weight of prairie duck, prepared in the Lakota way, alongside Boston-style bread, pemmican next to preserved fruits, wild tea serving alongside English coffee. The grandmother says she has never seen such a gathering in all her years. Black Wolf entered the lodge silently, but Sarah sensed his presence. He moved to stand behind her, one hand resting on her shoulder as he studied the journal's pages. Together, they had filled it with accounts of small victories and ongoing challenges. The first trade agreement written in both languages, the establishment of shared hunting territories, the weekly councils where both peoples aired grievances and found solutions. You should add today's other news, he said softly, mindful of their sleeping son. Sarah smiled, turning to a fresh page. In careful strokes, she recorded how Captain Morrison had requested Black Wolf's help in training a joint patrol. Soldiers and warriors working together to protect the territory from the bandits who still haunted its edges. More significantly, the fort's commander had proposed establishing a permanent trading post halfway between the two communities, with Sarah and Black Wolf as its administrators. A place between worlds, she wrote, like us. Black Wolf added his own contribution to the page, sophisticated pictographs showing two peoples meeting beneath a shared sun. His artistic skill had grown alongside her understanding of Lakota symbolism, allowing them to create a truly dual record of their times. Swift Hawk says other tribes are watching, he remarked, lifting their drowsing son from his cradle. Some think we have grown weak by mixing with white ways. Others see the strength in new paths. Sarah watched him cradle their child, this fierce warrior who had become such a gentle father. And what do you tell them? I tell them to count coup against hunger, against waste, against the darkness of closed minds. He smiled, an expression that still made her heart flutter. These are enemies worthy of a warrior's best strength. Their journal held evidence of that strength, accounts of how the fort's doctor now worked alongside Lakota healers, combining their knowledge to fight diseases that had once devastated both peoples. How trading partnerships had helped both communities survive the harsh winter. How children grew up speaking both languages, moving easily between cultures, but it also recorded the struggles. Resistance from hardliners on both sides, occasional violence that threatened the peace, the challenge of maintaining traditions while embracing necessary change. Sarah had insisted on documenting these as well, believing that future readers should understand that peace was not a destination, but a journey, requiring constant attention and care. Dawn Singer says she's teaching other women to make cradles. Like our sons, Black Wolf said, settling beside her with the baby. Not exactly the same. Each family adds its own stories, but the idea of blending ways spreads like wind through grass. Sarah added this detail to their record, then sat back to study the pages. Here was her mother's first visit, her initial shock giving way to grudging admiration for the life her daughter had built. Here was the grandmother's vision of children yet unborn, carrying the seeds of understanding into future seasons. Here were small moments of triumph. The first time Margaret Morrison accepted a Lakota name, the day Swift Hawk's son learned to write English poetry, the morning the fort commander's wife asked the grandmother to help with her difficult pregnancy. Sometimes, Sarah said, touching the beaded bracelet she still wore, I wonder what Thomas would think of all this. She no longer spoke her first husband's name with pain, but with gentle remembrance. Black Wolf was quiet for a moment, respecting her thought. He was a warrior who died protecting others, he finally said. I think he would understand protecting people through peace as well as war. Their son stirred, opening eyes that held his father's darkness and his mother's shape. Sarah added one final note to the day's entry. We are building a bridge, not just between two peoples, but between what was and what could be. Every hand that helps in its construction, every mind that opens to new possibilities, every heart that chooses understanding over fear. These are the foundation stones of a future our children will inherit. In the sacred lodge, beneath the white buffalo hide that had first welcomed her, Sarah held up two feathers, one from an eagle, one from a hawk. The grandmother's gnarled fingers guided hers as they bound the feathers together with strands of sinew and beads, creating a symbol of two natures joined as one. Like your own story, the grandmother said softly, separate yet stronger together. Her eyes, though clouded with age, still held the wisdom that had helped guide two peoples toward understanding. Outside, the sounds of the combined harvest celebration drifted on the autumn wind, children's laughter in two languages, drums keeping time with fiddle music, the happy murmur of two communities sharing food and fellowship. 10 years had passed since Sarah had first fled the fort's walls, yet sometimes it seemed like only yesterday that a dying woman had found new life through an act of compassion. Black Wolf entered the lodge, their son, Thomas Swift Wolf, following. With his little sister, Dawn Flower, the children's faces reflected their dual heritage, the perfect bridge between worlds that their parents had worked so hard to build. Mother, Thomas said in careful Lakota. Swift Hawk, says the council, is ready. Sarah rose, the bound feathers in her hands, feeling the weight of the moment. Today, she would formally accept the role of storykeeper for both communities, responsible for maintaining their shared history and teaching future generations the path of understanding. You have walked this path with great courage, the grandmother said, touching the beaded bracelet Sarah still wore. "Now you will help others find their way." Black Wolf's hand found hers as they stepped into the sunlight. The trading post they administered had grown into a true settlement where both peoples lived and worked together. Children played in the spaces between cultures, women shared craft secrets across traditional boundaries, and warriors from both sides patrolled together to keep the peace. At the council fire, Sarah saw faces that told their own story of change. Margaret Morrison, wearing a blend of frontier dress and Lakota beadwork, Swifthawk's son, now a translator for official treaties, the fort commander's wife teaching a group of children songs in both languages. The bound feathers caught the light, as Sarah took her place beside the grandmother. She had rehearsed formal words for this moment, but looking out at the gathered faces, some pale, some dark, many somewhere between, she spoke instead from her heart. 10 years ago, I was lost between worlds, she said in both languages, her voice carrying clearly. Now I stand in the center of a new world we have all built together. She held up the bound feathers. Like these feathers, we are strongest when we join our different gifts, when we learn to fly together. Black Wolf's proud smile warmed her heart, and their children's presence reminded her of all they had gained. The journal they had kept lay open nearby, its pages a testament to their journey. But the real proof of their success lived in the daily reality around them, in shared meals and marriages, in traded skills and mutual respect, in children who moved easily between cultures. The path ahead will not always be easy, she continued, thinking of the challenges they still faced. But we have learned that understanding grows like prairie grass, one blade at a time, until suddenly you find yourself surrounded by a sea of green. As the sun set behind the lodge, painting the sky in colors no single culture could claim, Sarah felt the truth of their journey settle into her bones. The bound feathers would join their journal, the carved horse, the mixed culture cradle, and the star quilt as symbols of a legacy that would outlive them all. Some might call it a small thing. This peace they had built in one corner of the vast frontier. But as Black Wolf had taught her long ago, even the mighty rivers begin as scattered raindrops. Their story, like the intertwined feathers, would carry on the wind to other places, other hearts ready to learn that love knows no boundaries, that understanding bears the sweetest fruit, that the greatest journeys begin with a single act of courage, and somewhere, perhaps, another lost soul would find their way home to a love that transcended all divisions. Guided by the twin lights of compassion and hope that Sarah and Black Wolf had kindled in the wilderness of their own hearts,